The first signs that something unusual was unfolding did not arrive as a headline or a public statement. They appeared quietly in fragments scattered across private conversations and subtle shifts in behavior that most people would never notice. Invitations were delayed, schedules changed without explanation. People who were normally visible stepped back, just slightly, as if waiting for something they could not yet name. At the time, it felt insignificant. Looking back, it feels like the moment the ground began to move. In public, everything still looked stable. A well-known public couple continued their appearances. A wealthy social circle carried on with its usual gatherings. The setting was polished, controlled, and carefully managed. But beneath that surface, some observers began to sense tension. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that hums quietly, persistent, and unresolved. According to public commentary, this was when conversations started to shift from admiration to uncertainty. What makes this situation difficult to understand is not one dramatic event, but the accumulation of small details. A look held for a moment too long, a conversation that ended abruptly, a host who seemed eager to move guests along sooner than expected. None of these moments prove anything on their own. There has been no official confirmation of wrongdoing, no formal statements released, and no verified evidence presented to the public. And yet, the questions continue to grow. Some online discussions suggest that a private gathering held far from cameras and press may have played a role in changing how people within this circle viewed one another. The gathering itself was not unusual. Private dinners among influential figures happen often and usually pass without notice. What followed, however, was different. People who were present reportedly became more guarded. Communication slowed. Trust, once assumed, appeared strained. This is where the story begins to take shape, not as a scandal confirmed, but as a situation unfolding in real time. It is not about a single accusation or a clear timeline. It is about perception, reaction, and the way power and relationships can shift quietly before anyone realizes what is happening. At this point, many are simply watching, trying to understand why something that once felt solid now feels uncertain, and why the discussion has not faded away. To understand why this moment has drawn so much attention, it helps to look at the background that led up to it. The people involved did not appear suddenly, and the environment they moved through was built over years. Wealth, reputation, and access formed a closed system where trust mattered as much as money. Entry into that system was slow, controlled, and often dependent on personal relationships rather than public status. Within this world, private gatherings served a specific purpose. They were not just social events. They were spaces where alliances were tested, impressions were formed, and long-term decisions quietly began. Attendance alone signaled acceptance. Behavior inside those rooms mattered, sometimes more than anything said in public. According to public commentary, even small missteps could change how someone was viewed for years. The couple at the center of current discussion had until recently been seen as an unusual but accepted presence in these circles. Their background set them apart, yet that difference also brought curiosity. They were perceived as outsiders who had gained entry through a mix of visibility and narrative. At first, this worked in their favor. Hosts saw value in the attention they brought. Conversations were polite. Doors opened. Over time, however, that initial curiosity began to shift. Some observers noted that expectations were not always aligned. In environments where discretion is valued, even the appearance of seeking advantage can raise concern. There has been no confirmation that boundaries were crossed, but several commentators have suggested that behavior interpreted as informal in one culture may feel intrusive in another. This difference alone can cause lasting discomfort. The private dinner that continues to be referenced was, by most accounts, meant to be routine. A small guest list, no media presence, a controlled setting designed to ensure privacy. These details matter because they explain why reactions afterward were so quiet. There were no public arguments, no visible fallout. Instead, the response took the form of distance. Follow-up invitations did not come. Communication became indirect. This is where interpretations begin to diverge. Some online discussions frame the shift as a misunderstanding amplified by rumor. Others suggest it reflects deeper concerns about intention and trust. What is clear is that no official record exists to explain the change. No statements have been issued, no confirmations made. Everything remains in the realm of analysis rather than fact. The role of reputation is central here. In tightly connected social systems, reputation does not change through announcements. It changes through shared impressions. A single evening can redefine how someone is spoken about when they are not in the room. According to public commentary, that appears to be what happened here, not through accusation, but through reassessment. As these impressions circulated privately, they eventually reached a wider audience through indirect channels. Comments appeared without context. References were vague. Nothing could be directly challenged because nothing had been formally said. This ambiguity allowed speculation to grow. the absence of clarity created space for interpretation. For the couple involved, this period coincided with increased public scrutiny in other areas of their lives. Financial questions, branding challenges, and shifting public support were already part of the conversation. That context matters because it shaped how new information, even unverified, was received. When confidence is already under review, uncertainty carries more weight. This is why the discussion has persisted, not because of confirmed events, but because of timing, environment, and the quiet way reactions unfolded. The background does not point to a single moment of failure. It points to a gradual change in how trust was perceived. And once that perception shifted, everything that followed was viewed through a different lens. As these quiet shifts became more noticeable, people who followed the situation closely began asking questions. Not direct questions that could be answered easily, but broader ones about intention, awareness, and balance within the relationship at the center of the discussion. According to public commentary, the focus was not on what may or may not have happened, but on how those involved seemed to respond afterward. Observers noted changes that felt subtle but meaningful. Public appearances continued, yet something appeared different in tone. Interactions seemed more formal, less natural. In private settings, as some online discussions suggest, the dynamic between partners was being quietly reassessed by those around them. This was not presented as blame, it was framed as concern. One recurring question involved awareness. In tightly managed environments, people tend to notice when someone appears disconnected from what is happening nearby. Some commentary speculated that one partner may not have fully understood how certain actions or conversations were being interpreted by others in the room. Again, there is no confirmation of this. It remains interpretation, shaped by hindsight and the reactions that followed. Another question centered on motivation. Why seek deeper access to a circle already difficult to navigate? Why push for connections that carry risk as well as opportunity? Supporters of the couple argue that these efforts were misunderstood attempts at building partnerships. Critics suggest that ambition, when combined with pressure, can sometimes appear aggressive even if that was not the intent. At this point, the discussion began to widen. It was no longer limited to a single evening or gathering. Patterns were being examined. Past interactions were reconsidered. Moments that once seemed unremarkable were revisited under new assumptions. This is a common process when clarity is lacking. People try to find coherence by connecting unrelated details. Some online discussions also raised questions about imbalance within the relationship itself. Public life places strain on any partnership, especially when roles are unclear. One partner may carry more familiarity with certain environments, while the other relies on trust. According to commentary, this imbalance may have left room for misunderstanding, both internally and externally. What followed only added to the uncertainty. Attempts to correct the narrative were either delayed or absent. Silence, intentional or not, allowed speculation to fill the gap. In environments where reputation is managed carefully, silence is rarely neutral. It can be read as caution, confidence, or avoidance, depending on perspective. Importantly, no formal denial or clarification was issued during this period. This does not imply guilt or confirmation. It simply highlights how communication choices influence perception. When stories spread without clear anchors, they take on a life of their own. As the questions grew, so did the sense that this was no longer about one situation. It was about trust, judgment, and how quickly status can change when confidence erodes. People watching from the outside were not reacting to evidence. They were reacting to the absence of reassurance. This is where the discussion settled for a time, not resolved but suspended, waiting for either confirmation or closure that never came. And in that space, the story continued to develop, shaped less by facts and more by how uncertainty was handled. As time passed, the discussion began to shift again, this time focusing less on individual moments and more on patterns. People were no longer asking what happened at one dinner or during one conversation. They were asking whether a series of small choices, taken together, revealed something larger. This is where the tension quietly increased. According to public commentary, some within these social circles started comparing notes, not in an organized way and not with the goal of creating conflict, but through casual exchanges that slowly formed a shared impression. One person mentioned feeling uncomfortable during a private conversation. Another recalled a moment that now seemed out of place. On their own, these recollections meant little. Together, they began to suggest a pattern of unease. This is where the situation became more complex. Patterns are powerful, but they are also dangerous. They can bring clarity or they can reinforce assumptions. No formal claims were made. No official complaints were filed, according to available information. And yet, access changed. Invitations stopped coming. Introductions were no longer offered. The shift was quiet but firm. For those watching closely, this was the clearest sign that something had changed. In environments built on discretion, exclusion is rarely accidental. It is a response, even if it is never explained. Some commentators have suggested that this form of response is chosen specifically to avoid escalation. By withdrawing access rather than confronting behavior, conflict is contained. At the same time, external pressure was growing. Public interest in the couple's financial and professional ventures was increasing. Projects were being questioned. Partnerships were being reevaluated. None of this was directly connected to the private social tensions, but timing matters. When multiple forms of scrutiny overlap, each one amplifies the others. This overlap created a sense of instability. Supporters argued that the couple was being unfairly judged, that ambition was being mistaken for manipulation. Critics argued that repeated discomfort among peers is rarely coincidence. Both sides relied on interpretation rather than proof, and that is what made the situation so unsettled. Within the relationship itself, observers began noting signs of strain. These were not dramatic or public displays. They were subtle, moments where one partner appeared more guarded, situations where responses seemed delayed or rehearsed. According to public commentary, these signs suggested internal conversations that were not being shared publicly. What followed only added to the sense that this was becoming unsustainable. Attempts to regain footing within these circles appeared unsuccessful. New connections did not replace the old ones. Silence from influential figures spoke louder than criticism ever could. In systems built on trust, once confidence is lost, it is rarely restored quickly. The idea of intent became central at this stage. Did anyone intend harm? There is no confirmation that they did, but intent matters less than impact in environments governed by unwritten rules. Even actions meant to secure opportunity can be viewed as intrusive if they cross cultural or personal boundaries. As these interpretations solidified, reactions became more coordinated, though still unofficial. People shared warnings quietly. Hosts became cautious. According to online discussions, this was framed not as punishment, but as protection of the group. The goal was to preserve stability, not assign blame. This rising tension never reached a public breaking point. There were no confrontations, no dramatic exits. Instead, it manifested as isolation. And isolation, especially when unexpected, can be deeply destabilizing. It forces reflection. It forces questions that can no longer be avoided. By this stage, it was clear that the story was no longer about a single incident. It was about how patterns are perceived, how trust is managed, and how quickly positions can change when confidence erodes. The tension did not explode. It settled in, steady and unresolved, shaping every move that followed. As the situation continued to unfold, attention gradually shifted outward, toward how the wider public, media voices, and institutions were responding. What stood out was not loud condemnation or unified support, but hesitation. Coverage became careful. Language softened. Stories were framed as analysis rather than reporting. According to public commentary, this caution reflected uncertainty rather than indifference. Media outlets that had once been eager to amplify every move now appeared restrained. Articles referenced unnamed sources or spoke in general terms. Phrases like "according to observers" and "some within the circle" became common. This was not an accident. When information is incomplete and relationships are involved, established platforms tend to slow down. The risk of getting it wrong becomes too high. On social media, the reaction followed a different pattern. Discussion was constant but fragmented. Supporters emphasized the lack of confirmed facts. Critics focused on patterns and timing. Many users admitted they were unsure what to believe, yet felt something was unresolved. This mix of doubt and suspicion kept the conversation active without pushing it toward conclusion. Institutions connected to the individuals involved also appeared to respond quietly. No announcements were made. No policies were changed publicly. And yet some partnerships seemed to pause. Events were postponed or restructured. According to online discussions, this was interpreted as caution rather than rejection. Institutions tend to wait for clarity before committing, especially when reputational risk is involved. One notable aspect of this phase was how little direct communication came from the people at the center of the story. Silence can be strategic. It can also be protective. Without confirmed accusations to answer, there may have been no clear statement to make. Still, the absence of explanation allowed others to define the narrative, even if only partially. Public reaction was shaped by this vacuum. People projected their own assumptions into the gaps. For some, the lack of denial suggested confidence that the situation would resolve on its own. For others, it suggested an inability to respond effectively. Neither interpretation is confirmed. They exist because uncertainty invites interpretation. Commentators also noted a shift in tone when the couple was discussed in unrelated contexts. Achievements were acknowledged, but enthusiasm was muted. Praise became cautious. This subtle change mattered. It suggested that even without formal conclusions, perception had already shifted. Within elite circles, reaction often takes the form of alignment. People watch each other closely, adjusting their behavior based on perceived consensus. According to public commentary, this led to a quiet distancing. Not everyone withdrew. Some remained publicly supportive. Others chose neutrality. Very few were openly critical. This pattern reflects how influence operates in uncertain situations. Direct opposition can create conflict. Neutrality preserves flexibility. Many institutions and individuals appeared to choose the latter. They waited, observing how the situation might develop before taking clearer positions. Importantly, no regulatory or legal bodies have confirmed any involvement related to these discussions. There have been no official investigations announced, no formal complaints acknowledged. This distinction matters. The story remains firmly in the realm of public discourse, shaped by perception rather than procedure. At the same time, the persistence of the conversation indicates that people feel the situation speaks to something broader. Issues of access, power, and trust resonate beyond the individuals involved. Viewers and readers are not just following a story, they are reflecting on how influence works behind closed doors. This broader relevance is likely why the discussion has not faded. Media attention ebbs and flows, but the underlying questions remain. How are boundaries set in private spaces? How is ambition interpreted across cultures? What happens when silence replaces explanation? As institutional reaction stayed measured and public reaction remained divided, the story entered a new phase. It was no longer accelerating, but it was not resolving either. It settled into a state of watchfulness. People waited for a signal, a statement, or a development that might bring clarity. Until then, reactions remained cautious, calculated, and incomplete. No one appeared eager to close the conversation, but few were willing to push it forward decisively. This balance, fragile and tense, is often where stories linger the longest. What keeps this story alive is not a single unanswered question, but the way multiple uncertainties continue to overlap. Each time interest seems to slow, a new detail, reaction, or absence of reaction pulls attention back. According to public commentary, this is not because new facts are emerging, but because the implications remain unresolved. At the center of it all is the issue of trust. Trust between partners, trust between hosts and guests, trust between institutions and the people they associate with. When trust is questioned, even quietly, it creates ripples that travel far beyond the original setting. People begin reassessing past decisions, they reconsider future plans, and they do so cautiously, often without explanation. Another reason the discussion continues is the lack of closure. In many public controversies, a statement is released, an investigation is announced, or a clear denial is issued. None of that has happened here. There has been no official confirmation of wrongdoing, but also no definitive resolution. This leaves space for speculation to persist, even among those who prefer to reserve judgment. Some observers have suggested that the situation highlights a broader tension between visibility and discretion. In highly private environments, visibility can be seen as disruptive. Attention changes behavior. It changes expectations. When someone brings a different approach into a system built on quiet understanding, friction can occur without anyone intending it. The relationship at the heart of the story also continues to draw interest. Public partnerships invite public interpretation, even when the most important conversations happen in private. According to online discussions, people are not trying to assign blame as much as they are trying to understand how pressure, ambition, and isolation interact over time. This ongoing interest is reinforced by the fact that consequences, if any, appear subtle rather than dramatic. There has been no collapse, no clear turning point. Instead, there has been a gradual narrowing of options, fewer invitations, fewer visible allies. These changes are easy to miss unless someone is looking closely. Media dynamics play a role as well. Stories without clear endings tend to resurface when related topics arise. A new project, a public appearance, or a delayed announcement can reignite discussion, even if nothing directly connects back to the original situation. Each appearance is viewed through the lens of what remains unanswered. There's also a sense that this story reflects a moment of transition. Public figures often reach points where previous strategies no longer work as intended. What once opened doors may begin to close them. According to public commentary, this transition can be difficult to manage, especially when it happens across different cultures and expectations. Importantly, none of this confirms intent, fault, or outcome. the story continues because it exists in a gray area. It raises questions about perception rather than proving events, and in a media environment that thrives on certainty, ambiguity can be more compelling than clear answers. As time goes on, the conversation may eventually fade, replaced by new developments or redirected attention, or it may resolve through clarity that has not yet arrived. Until then, it remains a case study in how stories persist not because of what is known, but because of what is not. This is why the discussion continues, not driven by outrage but by unease, not fueled by proof but by pattern. And as long as those patterns remain open to interpretation, the story is unlikely to fully disappear. As this discussion slowly settles into the background, what remains is a sense of caution rather than conclusion. No clear answers have emerged, and that in itself has shaped how the story is remembered. It has become less about any specific claim and more about how quickly confidence can shift when clarity is missing. For those watching closely, the lesson is not dramatic. It is quiet and measured. Public life, especially at high levels, operates on layers that rarely intersect cleanly. Private spaces have their own rules. When those rules are misunderstood, the consequences are often invisible at first. They appear later in changed attitudes and withdrawn opportunities. According to public commentary, this situation has encouraged reflection among others who move through similar environments. It has reminded people that reputation is not only built through success, but through restraint. That trust is maintained as much by what is not done as by what is achieved. These are not moral judgments. They are observations shaped by experience. The individuals involved continue their lives and work. Appearances are made. Projects move forward. Nothing suggests a dramatic end or a definitive break, and yet the context around them has changed. Every action is now interpreted through a more careful lens. This is not punishment, it is awareness. What stands out most is how little was required to reach this point. No public accusations, no official actions, just a series of reactions that, taken together, altered perception. This underscores how influence operates quietly, especially among those who value stability over spectacle. In the end, the story does not resolve with a clear verdict. It fades into something more complex, a reminder that not all turning points are announced. Some are felt only in hindsight, some unfold without witnesses, leaving behind only questions and changed dynamics. For now, those questions remain open, and perhaps that is where the story is meant to rest, not as a scandal confirmed, but as a moment that revealed how fragile certainty can be and how easily balance can shift when understanding breaks down. This is not the end of a narrative, but a pause in it, and until something changes, that pause is where the story stays.